Hello. We'll get started in just a few moments. We'll let a couple more people jump on. Okay, so today we're going to talk about gardening. I want to remind you of the victory gardens that we had back in World War II. Now, this was a little bit before my time, but it was certainly something we learned about in history. And it was the way that people supported their country in times of food shortages and trauma and stress. And one of the things that I worry about is with everything that's going on right now, and with the times that we have seen stuff fly off the shelves in the grocery store, that this might be a good year to bring back those victory gardens. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about gardening philosophy, how to set up your garden, and companion planting. So in terms of garden philosophy, first thing you have to decide is, what is it that you're going to plant? Fruits, vegetables, herbs. Fruits you plant once, typically. You plant a tree and you have it forever. You plant raspberry bushes, you have it forever. So that's a one-time planting, and then they keep coming back. Vegetables, most vegetables are annuals. Asparagus being one that does come back, but the others are generally annuals. Now, herbs. There's a couple of reasons to plant herbs. One is because you like the way they taste in your dinners, but the other is medicine. So if you are local to this area, you will remember a couple of years ago we had a big landslide down in Oso. And the little IGA there ran out of food real fast, and so did the pharmacy run out of the medicines that they had. If you take medicine on a regular basis, a prescription, there's a couple things you need to know. So this one has nothing to do with gardening, but I'm going to give you this helpful hint anyway. So this is your hint for this particular one. And that is, call the pharmacy and find out when is the earliest date you can get your refill. There's usually a window of 3 to 5 days where you can get your prescription. And if you go on the very first day and get your prescription, that gives you 3 to 5 extra pills. And if you do that every month, then pretty soon what you've got is a month's supply in the event you can't get your medicine. Now, the other thing you can do is do some research and look at what herbs will help your medical condition, and then go ahead and plant those herbs so in an emergency you're okay. It is excuse me just a second. Okay, so if you are depressed, you can use lavender, or you can use some perhaps St. John's wort. If you look at the contraindications on those, if you have high blood pressure, you can use hibiscus, you can use hawthornberry. So those are things that planting in your garden is a good idea. And the herbs generally come back as well. So you, not every one of them, but a lot of them do come back. So that's pretty good. Now, the other thing you have to look at is, why are you growing? Are you growing because you like gardening and you're just going to eat the vegetables and fruits throughout the summer? Or are you looking for something that you can plant and then store or preserve? And so canning, freezing, dehydrating, putting things in a root cellar or a similar means of storage, you have to have an idea of how much you want to plant. And that tells you then what is your garden going to look like. Is your garden going to be planting in the ground? Is it going to be in raised beds, or is it going to be in containers? Now, my yard is a combination of all of those. I have berries and an apple tree and a bay leaf tree in the ground. I'll be putting a plum tree in this year. I have I put my tomatoes and my potatoes and my lettuce in containers, and then I've got raised beds as well. So you're going to look at your yard and figure out what is the best for your yard and for you. It's a whole lot easier for me to weed a raised bed or a container than it is to weed the ground. Because I'm me, I'm going to talk about planting by the moon. I always think that getting all of the opportunities to make the best garden or the best anything I'm doing is it makes sense to use all of the tools at my that I have. So planting by the moon has been happening since time began and people started planting. The moon what the moon does is it affects the tides, and the tides are water. So it affects water everywhere. It affects water in our bodies, and that's why if you talk to anybody that works in a hospital or that works as a first responder, will tell you that the full moon, people go crazy, and there's a whole lot more accidents and a whole lot more incidences, and that's because the water in your body is being affected by the full moon. Now, the moisture in the earth is also affected by the moon. In a new moon or a waxing moon, when the moon is getting bigger, the moisture in the ground is closer to the surface. And so what you want to do at that point in time in the waxing and new moon is plant the plants that have an above ground crop. So strawberries, tomatoes, peppers, corn, anything that the crop is above the ground. At the full moon and the waning moon, when the moon gets smaller, that is when you plant the crops that have the below ground produce. It is because the water is pulled deeper into the earth. Now, so that would be potatoes, peanuts, carrots, turnips, anything that the edible portion is is underneath. So turmeric, ginger, horseradish, valerian root, those are all things that you would plant in the waxing or in the waning moon. It is now companion planting is a way to put vegetables and fruits in the same raised bed or right next to each other so that it maximizes your produce and what you get out of it. So the actual definition of companion planting, and I'm going to read this one, is companion planting is the strategic placement of plants in close proximity so that the plants can help each other out. It allows you to maximize the use of the garden space while taking advantage of the natural abilities of each plant. So the way that the companion planting works is some plants give nutrients back to the ground that other plants need. Some plants emit smells that will attract insects like ladybugs, which you would like to have in your garden because they eat the aphids. Or they can repel bugs that are going to be like tomato worms, that are going to be disastrous if you get those in your plants. Taller plants can create shade for smaller plants that don't need full sunlight, but instead need something a little bit more gentle. It can reduce the amount of maintenance in your garden because it can, the ground cover will choke out weeds, and you will not need to use herbicides or pesticides. So it just is all the way around. It makes a good way to go. So what I did this year is I created a master list of the vegetables and fruits that I want in my yard. And once I created that list, and I've got a list of about 30 that include corn, pumpkins, pole beans, bush beans, acorn squash, patty pan squash, zucchini, crookneck squash, lettuce, Brussels sprouts, beets, garlic, asparagus, comfrey, cabbage, peas, kale, tomatoes, basil, carrots, rosemary, broccoli, spinach, onion, leeks. I've got blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, apples, plums, and I've got a bay tree. So the first thing you do is you look at these. Now there is a book that I really like. It is this one right here. It is Companion Planting, a Beginner's Guide. And the author is, who's the author? The author is M. Grand. Now, this one, as you can see, is a Kindle edition, and it's free on Kindle. There are other companion planting books that are free on Kindle as well, and it's a good read if you're going to do, if you're going to try this companion planting. So what I determined is what I'm going to, of this list of fruits and vegetables, what is going to be planted in the ground. And they're already planted except for the plum tree, which will go in a week or so. Then you have to determine how are you going to plant the other things. Now, potatoes, I plant in a big black garbage can because that is easier than making potato mounds in the ground or in a bed. It is the black of the garbage can attracts the sun, and so it helps them grow faster. And so that's always put in. And if this is my yard, and what we've got, and I see that I'm missing one of them here, and that's the potatoes. So the potatoes go right there. Now these 5 circles are tires. And that's where I plant my tomatoes. Again, it attracts the sun, and so the tomatoes get more sun than what they would, and more heat than they would normally get. Now, the thing about the book that I just showed you is they've got a listing of all the fruits and vegetables that you ever would want and a lot that you don't want, and it tells you which ones are companionable. And it is, and which ones to put together. So, for me, what I did was I wrote each plant that I want to put in on a piece of paper so that I then looked them up in the book and actually saw, okay, with tomatoes, what goes with tomatoes? Well, tomatoes are very good with carrots and basil. The basil will actually keep away some of the insects and will give me prettier tomatoes. So these are tomatoes here. I'm putting asparagus right here because tomatoes and asparagus go well together as well. It is, so what I have right now is I have 5 garden beds. So this is my house that's right here. I've got a garden bed behind my house, 3 to the side. I've got the chicken coop is right here, and then here is where I have my 5th garden bed. These are the berries. I've got raspberries, blackberries, and boysenberries all here. My bay tree is in the back. My apple tree is in the front. And I think, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to put the plum tree yet. So what I have done is I've written down here so that just you can see how they put together. 2 of these beds are going to be the 3 sisters. Now, the three sisters are corn, pole beans, and squash. You plant the corn and it grows tall. Then you train your pole beans to go up the corn. And the squash becomes the ground cover, so you don't end up having it to weed because you've got all that ground cover there. So I'm going to have 2 beds of that. And then I'm going to have a bed with beets, Brussels sprouts, bush beans, and garlic. Another one with asparagus, comfrey, cabbage, peas, and kale. And one with rosemary, broccoli, spinach, onions, and leeks. The container gardens will be, the 5 round ones will be tomatoes and carrots or basil. And then I have a little square planter that will be on my front porch that'll be lettuce. So I'll have some nice good salads. When I was looking up um, the Victory Gardens, they were talking about how much fresh fruits and vegetables out of your garden actually build your immune system. So any of the cabbage-like vegetables are an amazing anti-inflammatory and really good for you. It is, so that would be Brussels sprouts and cabbage and broccoli, the cruciferous vegetables. Beets are very good for your venous health, the veins in your body. So there's a lot that you can do with a garden to keep you healthier, to keep your tummy fed, and to keep your wallet in a little bit better shape than going to the grocery store all of the time. So my garden is still overgrown right now. I'm getting it prepared, and as we continue through the summer, I will take you out into my garden and let you see how it's going. And I will, and as we get to the end of the summer, we'll start talking about how you go about storing food. So, thank you so very much for joining me. If you have any questions, write them down. I'll answer them like I usually do. And stay safe and healthy with grit and grace. This is Lynn Monajan. Thanks for being with me.